The silence in that fancy restaurant was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. 20 pairs of eyes stared at me like I had just grown 2 heads. My son's fiancée, Isabella, sat frozen in her chair, her face whiter than the expensive tablecloth beneath her trembling hands. Her mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air, and I could see the exact moment when she realized her perfect little world was about to come crashing down around her. You see, for the past hour, this young woman had been insulting me in Spanish, thinking I was just another clueless old American woman who couldn't understand a word she was saying. She called me a cow. She said my voice sounded like an annoying chihuahua. She laughed with her family and friends about how pathetic I looked in my cheap dress and how embarrassed she was that her future mother-in-law was such a simple, stupid woman. But here's the thing nobody knew about me. I speak 5 languages fluently, so when I stood up from my chair, cleared my throat, and began responding to every single one of her insults in perfect Spanish, then switched to flawless French, and finished with beautiful Italian, the shock on Isabella's face was worth every moment of humiliation I had endured. Her eyes grew wider with each word I spoke, and I watched as the color drained completely from her cheeks. But this moment of sweet revenge was just the beginning of a story that would tear my family apart and force me to make choices I never thought I'd have to make. Comment below, as I'd love to hear your thought, and subscribe to the channel to help us hit that big 5,000 subscriber milestone. We're so close, and every single one counts. It's free for you, but it means everything to this channel. And hey, while you're at it, I've left a video and also a link to a playlist on the final screen that I promise will surprise you. Seriously, don't miss them. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Now go hit that button and be part of the journey. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. 3 months before that unforgettable dinner. My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I raised my son Daniel as a single mother after my husband passed away when Daniel was only 8 years old. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving lunch at a diner during the day, just to make sure my boy had everything he needed. Daniel grew up to be everything I had hoped for. He became a successful lawyer, bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, and always made time for his old mom. Every Sunday he would come over for dinner, and we would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Those were the happiest moments of my week. But everything changed the day Daniel brought Isabella home to meet me. I remember it was a sunny Tuesday afternoon in March. I had just finished tending to my small garden when I heard Daniel's car pull into my driveway. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the front door, excited to finally meet the woman my son had been telling me about for the past 6 months. "Mom, I want you to meet Isabella," Daniel said, his face glowing with happiness as he helped a stunning young woman out of his car. Isabella was beautiful, there was no denying that. She had long, dark hair that caught the sunlight, and she wore an expensive-looking dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. But it wasn't her beauty that caught my attention. It was the way her smile seemed to disappear the moment she thought Daniel wasn't looking. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," Isabella said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her accent was slight, but noticeable. "Daniel has told me so much about you. Please, call me Margaret," I said, taking her hand. Her grip was weak, almost dismissive, and she pulled away quickly, as if touching me might somehow contaminate her. We went inside, and I served them the apple pie I had baked that morning, along with fresh coffee. Daniel couldn't stop smiling as he talked about his work and their plans together, but I noticed that Isabella barely touched her pie, and every time I spoke, she would glance at Daniel with what looked like barely concealed irritation. "Mom makes the best apple pie in the state," Daniel said proudly, taking another bite. I'm sure it's very traditional, Isabella replied with a tight smile. I tried to engage her in conversation, asking about her family, her work, and her interests. She answered politely enough, but I could sense something cold beneath her responses. When Daniel excused himself to take an important phone call from his office, Isabella's demeanor changed completely. She looked around my modest living room with undisguised disdain, her eyes lingering on my old furniture, the family photos on the mantel, and the handmade quilts my mother had passed down to me. I saw her take a picture with her phone of my kitchen, and something told me it wasn't because she admired the decor. "Your son is very devoted to you," she said, her voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "He's a good boy," I replied, trying to keep the conversation friendly. "I'm very proud of him." "Yes, I can see that," she said. But the way she said it made it sound like an accusation rather than an observation. When Daniel returned, Isabella's sweet smile was back in place, and she spent the rest of the visit hanging on his every word. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen the real Isabella, and it wasn't the woman my son thought he was in love with. Over the next few weeks, I tried to give Isabella the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just nervous about meeting me. Maybe I had misread the situation. But as Daniel brought her around more often, my concerns only grew. I noticed how she would subtly redirect conversations away from topics that involved me. When Daniel suggested we all go to dinner together, Isabella would suddenly have other plans. When he wanted to bring her to family gatherings, she would develop mysterious headaches or work emergencies. But the thing that bothered me most was how she began to change my son. Daniel started canceling our Sunday dinners, saying he was busy with Isabella. When I called him, he seemed distracted and distant. The easy conversations we used to have became stilted and brief. One evening, I decided to voice my concerns. Daniel had stopped by to pick up some old photo albums for a project Isabella was working on. "Son," I said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay between you and Isabella? You seem different lately." Daniel's face immediately hardened. "What do you mean, Mom?" I feel like maybe she doesn't like me very much, and I'm worried that's affecting our relationship." "That's ridiculous," Daniel snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it directed at me. "Isabella thinks you're wonderful. Maybe the problem is that you're not giving her a fair chance." His words stung worse than a slap. In all his 35 years, Daniel had never spoken to me that way. I could see Isabella's influence in his tone, in the way he looked at me like I was being unreasonable. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just want you to be happy." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but the damage was done. "I am happy, Mom. Isabella makes me happy. I need you to try harder with her, okay?" I nodded, even though everything in my heart was screaming that something was wrong. After he left, I sat in my empty kitchen and wondered what had happened to the son who used to tell me everything, who valued my opinion and trusted my judgment. But I was about to discover that Isabella's dislike for me went far deeper than I had imagined, and the lengths she would go to push me out of Daniel's life would shock me to my core. 2 weeks after that conversation with Daniel, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street. "Margaret, honey, I think there's something you need to know," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "What is it, Elena?" "That girl, Daniel's girlfriend, she was here yesterday with some friends. They were taking pictures of your house, your garden, your car, and Margaret—" Elena paused, as if she didn't want to continue. "What is it? Please tell me." "They were laughing, making jokes. I heard her call your house a dump and say something about how embarrassed she was that people might find out her future mother-in-law lived in such a pathetic little shack. I'm sorry, honey, but I thought you should know." My heart sank into my stomach. So my instincts had been right all along. Isabella wasn't just indifferent to me, she was actively ashamed of me. But even that revelation couldn't have prepared me for what would happen at the restaurant that night. Because Isabella's cruelty went far beyond simple embarrassment. She had a plan, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to remove me from my son's life forever. As I sat in my bedroom that night, staring at the old photo of Daniel and me from his college graduation, I had no idea that in just a few days, I would be sitting in an elegant restaurant, listening to the woman my son loved tear me apart in a language she thought I couldn't understand. But Isabella was about to learn that this old woman had more surprises in store than she could ever imagine. And when she finally discovered the truth about who I really was, the shock would be so devastating that it would change all of our lives forever. The morning after Elena's phone call, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My heart was heavy with the knowledge of what Isabella really thought of me, but I was determined not to let it show. I had raised Daniel to be better than this, and I still believed that somewhere deep down, the son I knew and loved was still there. I was in my kitchen making my usual morning coffee when my phone rang. It was Daniel, and for a moment, my heart lifted with hope that maybe he was calling to apologize for how he had spoken to me. "Hi, Mom," he said, and I could hear the forced cheerfulness in his voice. "I have some exciting news." "What's that, sweetheart?" "Isabella and I are engaged." The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. Hot coffee splashed in everywhere, but I barely noticed. My son, my only child, was engaged to a woman who despised me, and he sounded like he was reading from a script. "Mom, are you there?" I forced myself to find my voice. "Yes, I'm here. Congratulations, Daniel. I'm very happy for you." But even as I said the words, I could hear how hollow they sounded. Daniel must have heard it too, because his tone became defensive again. "We want to have an engagement party next Saturday. Isabella's family is flying in from Miami, and we've reserved a private dining room at Chez Laurent. You know, that French place downtown." Chez Laurent. I knew it well, though not from eating there. It was where I had worked as a translator for the owner, Monsieur Dubois. 15 years ago, when he first opened the restaurant, he needed someone who could speak French with his staff and translate for important clients. It was a job I had loved, but I had to give it up when I broke my hip and needed surgery. "That sounds lovely," I managed to say. "Great. The dinner starts at 7. Try to dress. Well, you know what I mean. Isabella's family is very sophisticated." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son was telling me I needed to dress better to be acceptable to his fiancée's family. I wondered if those were his words or Isabella's, but either way, they cut deep. "I'll do my best," I whispered. "Good. And Mom, please try to get along with Isabella's family. They're very important to her, and I need this night to go perfectly." After he hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, and cried for the first time in years. Not just because of what Daniel had said, but because I could hear how unhappy he sounded, even while delivering what should have been joyful news. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I went to the department store and bought the nicest dress I could afford, a simple navy blue number that was elegant, but not flashy. I had my hair done at the local salon, and I even splurged on a new pair of shoes. But as I got ready that Saturday evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what I wore or how I looked, Isabella would find something to criticize. I arrived at Chez Laurent 15 minutes early, hoping to have a few moments to compose myself before facing Isabella's family. The restaurant hadn't changed much since my time working there, and I felt a pang of nostalgia as I walked through the elegant dining room. The hostess led me to a private room in the back, where a long table was set with crisp white linens and gleaming silverware. I was the first to arrive, which gave me a chance to choose a seat where I could observe everyone without being the center of attention. Daniel and Isabella arrived next, followed by a stream of people who were clearly Isabella's family and friends. They were all impeccably dressed, speaking in rapid Spanish mixed with English, and carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that comes from money and social status. Isabella's mother, Carmen, was an older version of her daughter, beautiful, elegant, and cold. Her father, Roberto Cito, wore an expensive suit and spoke in the commanding voice of a man used to being obeyed. There were also several couples who seemed to be family friends, all dressed to the nines and speaking in the casual way of people who belonged to the same exclusive social circle. Daniel made the introductions, and everyone was polite enough, though I noticed the quick glances and subtle exchanges between Isabella's family members. I felt like a specimen being studied under a microscope. "Mrs. Thompson," Carmen said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "Isabella has told us so much about you." I wondered what exactly Isabella had said, but I simply smiled and nodded. "Please, call me Margaret. And congratulations on your daughter's engagement. You must be very proud." "Oh, we are," Roberto said, though his tone suggested he was anything but thrilled about his daughter marrying into my family. As we took our seats, I found myself placed at one end of the table, somewhat isolated from the main conversation. Daniel sat in the middle with Isabella beside him, surrounded by her family and friends. It was a seating arrangement that made it clear where I stood in the hierarchy of importance. The dinner began pleasantly enough. The conversation flowed in English, and with everyone making an effort to include me in discussions about the wedding plans, Daniel's work, and general pleasantries. I began to think that maybe I had misjudged the situation, that perhaps Isabella's family would be kinder than I had expected. But then, about halfway through the main course, something shifted. Isabella leaned over to whisper something in Spanish to the woman sitting next to her, and they both laughed. Then Carmen made a comment in Spanish, and suddenly the entire table was speaking in rapid Spanish, leaving me completely out of the conversation. Daniel looked uncomfortable and tried a few times to steer the conversation back to English, but Isabella would touch his arm and say something that made him smile and forget about including me. That's when I began to hear what they were really saying. "Look at her just sitting there," Isabella said in Spanish, gesturing toward me with her wine glass. "She has no idea what we're talking about. It's almost sad how clueless she is." My blood began to boil, but I kept my expression neutral, even managing to smile when Isabella looked in my direction. "The dress she's wearing," commented one of Isabella's friends, "it looks like something from a discount store. So cheap." "And did you see her house?" Isabella continued. "It's like a little shack. I'm so embarrassed that people will know she's going to be my mother-in-law." Carmen joined in, saying, "Poor Daniel. He's such a successful man, and he has to deal with that. No wonder he's so eager to start fresh with you, mija." But Isabella wasn't finished. She was just getting started, and what she said next made my hands clench into fists under the table. "You know what the worst part is?" Isabella said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She thinks she's so sweet and innocent, but she's just pathetic. The way she tries so hard to be included, like a little dog begging for scraps. And that voice of hers? It's so annoying, like a chihuahua yapping constantly." The table erupted in laughter, and I watched as my son smiled along, not understanding that they were talking about his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him a good life, the woman who had worked 2 jobs and gone without so he could have what he needed. "She probably thinks we actually like her," Roberto added with a chuckle. "Americans are so naive. They think everyone is as simple as they are." "The best part," Isabella continued, now emboldened by the laughter, "is that she'll never know what we really think of her. She's too stupid to learn Spanish, too boring to be interesting, and too old to matter. Once Daniel and I are married, I'll make sure she fades into the background, where she belongs." Another friend leaned in, saying, "You should see the way she looks at Daniel, like he's still a little boy. It's creepy how attached she is." "Don't worry," Isabella replied with a cruel smile. "I have plans to fix that. By this time next year, she'll be lucky if she sees Daniel once a month. I'm going to make sure he understands that his priorities need to change." As I listened to these horrible words, I felt something inside me break. Not my spirit. That was stronger than ever. What broke was my last hope that maybe, just maybe, Isabella could be reasoned with, that we could find a way to coexist for Daniel's sake. But what they said next pushed me over the edge completely. "You know," Carmen said thoughtfully, "maybe it would be better if something happened to her. Not anything terrible, of course, but maybe if she got sick or had to move to a nursing home. Then Daniel would be free to focus on his real family." Isabella nodded enthusiastically. "I've been thinking the same thing. Old people are so fragile. It wouldn't take much to convince Daniel that she needs professional care. Maybe if she had a little accident, or if her health started failing." The implications of what she was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to push me out of Daniel's life. They were contemplating ways to actively harm me or have me committed to get me out of the way permanently. I looked at my son, my beautiful boy who was sitting there smiling while his fiancée and her family discussed ways to destroy his mother. He had no idea what kind of people he was aligning himself with, and I realized that I might be the only thing standing between him and a lifetime of manipulation and control. That's when I made my decision. I was done being the polite, accommodating mother who smiled and took whatever was dished out. These people wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to discover that this old woman had been playing games a lot longer than they had. I caught the waiter's attention and asked for the check to be brought to me. Then I stood up slowly, smoothing down my cheap dress, and cleared my throat. The Spanish conversation died down as everyone looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, with my sweetest smile, "but I wanted to thank you all for such a lovely evening before I say good night." Isabella rolled her eyes and said something under her breath in Spanish about how I was finally leaving, but she had no idea what was coming next. What happened in those final moments would haunt Isabella for the rest of her life. And the shock of my revelation would send Daniel into a crisis that would force him to choose between the woman he thought he loved and the mother who had given him everything. As I prepared to deliver the surprise that would change all of our lives forever, I caught sight of someone familiar near the kitchen door, Monsieur Dubois himself, watching the scene unfold with obvious interest. He recognized me, I could tell, and the slight nod he gave me was all the encouragement I needed to proceed with my plan. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and Isabella was about to learn that you should never underestimate someone just because they seem harmless. Some of us have been hiding our true strength for so long that when we finally reveal it, the impact is absolutely devastating. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice clear and confident as it filled the stunned silence of that elegant dining room. "Primero," I said in perfect Spanish, looking directly at Isabella, "me gustaría agradecerte por llamarme vaca esta noche. Es interesante viniendo de alguien que claramente carece de educación básica." The color drained from Isabella's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. I continued, switching to French, as I turned to address her parents. "Ensuite, Madame Carmen, j'aimerais vous remercier pour avoir suggéré qu'il serait préférable que quelque chose m'arrive. C'est une façon charmante d'accueillir la famille." Carmen's elegant composure cracked, and she gripped her wine glass so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. Roberto's face had turned an alarming shade of red, and he was staring at me like I had just materialized from thin air. Finally, I switched to Italian, addressing the entire table with a smile that could have frozen fire. E infine, vorrei ringraziare tutti voi per avermi dato l'opportunità di vedere chi siete veramente. È stato illuminante. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. 20 pairs of eyes stared at me in absolute shock, but it was Daniel's expression that broke my heart. He looked like someone had just told him that everything he believed about the world was a lie. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. You understand Spanish?" "And French and Italian and German and Portuguese," I replied calmly, setting my napkin down on the table. "I'm also conversational in Mandarin, though I'm a bit rusty." Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than actual words. But you never said, how did you?" I looked at her with the kind of patience I might show to a small child having a tantrum. "You never asked, dear, and frankly, after tonight, I'm grateful you didn't. It's been quite educational listening to your family's plans for my future." Monsieur Dubois had moved closer to our table, and I could see the mixture of pride and amusement on his face. He had always appreciated my linguistic abilities when I worked for him. "Madame Thompson," he said in French, joining the conversation, "what a pleasure to see you again. Your French is as impeccable as ever." I smiled warmly at him, responding in French, "Merci, Pierre. Your restaurant is still as beautiful as I remember." Daniel was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. "You two know each other?" "Your mother worked here for several years," Monsieur Dubois explained in English. "She was my head translator, spoke with our international clients, helped train our foreign staff, handled all our diplomatic dinners. I was devastated when she had to leave after her surgery." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. He turned to stare at me, his eyes wide with confusion and what looked like the beginning of understanding. "Surgery?" he asked quietly. I had never told him about the hip surgery because I didn't want him to worry. He had been so busy with law school at the time, and I handled everything myself. The surgery, the recovery, the job loss, the financial struggles that followed. "It was nothing serious," I said dismissively, though we all knew that wasn't true. "The important thing is that I got better." But Isabella wasn't ready to let this moment pass without trying to salvage something. Her shock was quickly being replaced by anger, and I could see her mind working frantically to find a way to turn this situation to her advantage. "Well," she said, her voice shrill with desperation, "maybe you do speak Spanish, but that doesn't change anything. You still—" "Isabella." The single word from Daniel cut through her protests like a knife. His voice was quiet, but there was something in his tone that made everyone at the table freeze. He was staring at his fiancée with an expression I had never seen on his face before, a mixture of horror, disappointment, and growing fury. "What exactly did you say about my mother?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. Isabella's eyes darted around the table, looking for support from her family, but they were all staring at their plates, suddenly fascinated by the remains of their dinner. "Daniel, honey, you have to understand. What did you say?" Each word was delivered with surgical precision. I could see Isabella's mind racing, trying to figure out how much Daniel might have understood, how much damage control she could still do. We were just joking around. You know how families are when they get together. We didn't mean anything by it." But Daniel wasn't buying it. He turned to me, and for the first time in months, I saw my real son looking back at me. The boy who had always been able to tell when someone was lying, who had inherited my ability to read people. "Mom," he said softly. "What did they say?" I looked at Isabella, who was silently pleading with me not to destroy her world. For a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. She was young, she was scared, and she was about to lose everything she thought she wanted. But then I remembered her words about hoping something would happen to me, about wanting me to disappear from Daniel's life permanently, and my sympathy evaporated. "They said many things, sweetheart," I replied carefully. "But I think the most important thing they said was that they planned to make sure you rarely saw me after the wedding. Isabella was quite specific about changing your priorities." Daniel's face went white, and he turned to Isabella with an expression that made her shrink back in her chair. "Is that true?" "Daniel, please, let me explain. Is it true?" His voice was rising now, and other diners in the restaurant were beginning to notice the commotion in our private room. Isabella burst into tears, which might have been effective if Daniel hadn't just learned that she had been manipulating him for months. I wanted us to have our own life together. I didn't want to share you with my mother." Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You wanted me to abandon the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, so you could have me all to yourself? It's not like that." Isabella was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks. "I love you. Everything I did was because I love you." "No," Daniel said quietly, and the finality in his voice sent a chill through the room. "Love doesn't try to isolate people from their families. Love doesn't mock and humiliate innocent people. Love doesn't plot to make someone disappear." He pulled the engagement ring from Isabella's finger. She was too shocked to resist, and placed it on the table beside his untouched dessert. "This engagement is over." The chaos that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Isabella collapsed into hysterical sobs. Her mother started shouting at me in Spanish, calling me names that would have made a sailor blush, and Roberto was demanding that Daniel reconsider, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding. But through all the noise and drama, Daniel walked calmly around the table to where I was sitting. He helped me to my feet and offered me his arm. "Would you like to get out of here, Mom?" I nodded, suddenly feeling very tired. The adrenaline that had carried me through my dramatic revelation was fading, and I was beginning to realize the full magnitude of what had just happened. As we walked toward the exit, I could hear Isabella screaming behind us, begging Daniel to come back, promising that she would change, that she would love me like her own mother. But it was too late for promises. Daniel had seen who she really was, and there was no going back from that. Monsieur Dubois met us at the door, pressing a business card into my hand. "Madame Thompson," he said quietly, "if you ever need anything, a job, a reference, a friend, please don't hesitate to call me. What you did tonight took tremendous courage." Outside the restaurant, Daniel and I stood in the cool night air, neither of us speaking for several long minutes. I could see him struggling to process everything that had happened, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he loved with the person she had revealed herself to be. "Mom," he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." I took his hand in mine, the same way I had when he was a little boy and needed comfort. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. You couldn't have known." "But I should have seen it. I should have listened to you. God, the way I spoke to you last week." He covered his face with his hands. "Daniel, look at me." I waited until he lowered his hands and met my eyes. "Isabella is very good at what she does. She's beautiful. She's charming when she wants to be, and she knows how to make people see exactly what she wants them to see. You fell in love with the version of herself that she showed you. That's not your fault. How can you be so understanding? After what she said about you, what she was planning." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Because I raised you to be better than this, and because I know that the real Daniel, my Daniel, would never have gone along with her plans if he had known about them." We stood there for a while longer, holding hands in the streetlight like we had when he was small and afraid of the dark. But I knew this was just the calm before the storm. Isabella wasn't the type of woman who would accept defeat gracefully, and her family had too much pride to let this insult go unanswered. As if summoned by my thoughts, the restaurant door burst open behind us, and Isabella came running out, still in her designer dress, but looking completely disheveled. "Daniel!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. "Please, you have to listen to me. I can explain everything." But what she said next would shock both of us to our cores and set in motion a series of events that would test every bond our family had ever formed. Because Isabella had one final card to play, and it was going to change everything we thought we knew about love, loyalty, and the lengths some people will go to get what they want. Isabella's grip on Daniel's arm was desperate, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve as tears streamed down her face. But there was something different in her eyes now, not just desperation, but a calculating hardness that made my stomach turn. "Please, Daniel, just give me 5 minutes to explain," she begged, her voice trembling. "There's something you need to know. Something about your precious mother that will change everything." I felt Daniel's body tense beside me, and I could see the confusion flickering across his face. Even after everything that had happened tonight, Isabella still knew exactly which buttons to push. "Isabella, there's nothing you can say," Daniel started, but she cut him off. "She's not who you think she is!" Isabella's voice rose to nearly a shriek. "Your saint of a mother, the woman you think sacrificed everything for you, she's been lying to you your entire life." A cold dread settled in my stomach. There were things about my past, about Daniel's father, that I had never told my son, secrets I had kept buried for over 30 years, thinking I was protecting him. But how could Isabella possibly know about any of that? "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, though I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. Isabella released his arm and reached into her designer purse, pulling out a manila envelope that looked worn and weathered. My heart stopped when I saw it. I recognized that envelope. I had hidden it in a safety deposit box years ago, thinking no one would ever find it. 3 months ago, when I was planning our engagement party, I wanted to create a surprise photo display of your family history, Isabella said, her tears suddenly stopping as if someone had turned off a faucet. I hired a private investigator to help me track down old photos and documents. The calculating look in her eyes intensified, and I realized with growing horror that this had all been planned. Every cruel word at dinner, every insult, it had all been designed to push me into revealing my languages, to create this exact moment. "Isabella, stop," I said quietly, but she ignored me completely. "Do you want to know what he found?" she continued, waving the envelope in front of Daniel's face. "Do you want to know the truth about your father? About how he really died?" Daniel's face went pale, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, fear mixed with betrayal and confusion. "Mom," he whispered, "what is she talking about?" I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling 35 years of careful protection crumbling around me. When I opened them, both Daniel and Isabella were staring at me, waiting for an answer I wasn't sure I could give. "Your father didn't die in a car accident like she told you," Isabella said when I remained silent. "He didn't die when you were 8 years old. In fact, your father is still alive." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, looking between Isabella and me as if we were both strangers. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mom, tell her that's impossible." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Because Isabella was right. Robert Daniels, Daniel's father, was indeed still alive, living in Portland under a different name, with a different family. a family he had chosen over us when Daniel was just 8 years old. "Show him," Isabella commanded, thrusting the envelope toward me. "Show him the truth, Tim, or I will." My hands shook as I took the envelope. Inside were photographs, documents, and reports that I had hoped Daniel would never see. Pictures of Robert with his new wife and children. Marriage certificates. Birth certificates of the children he had actually stayed to raise. "Isabella, how did you get these?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I told you, I hired a private investigator. But that's not the best part." Her smile was cruel, though, all pretense of the sweet fiancé completely gone. "The best part is that your father has been living just 2 hours away for the past 15 years. He owns a successful construction company. He remarried 10 years after he abandoned you and has 2 other children he actually wanted enough to stick around for." Daniel snatched the envelope from my hands and began pulling out the contents. I watched his face as he saw the photographs of his father, older now, but clearly the same man from the few pictures I had shown Daniel over the years. "This doesn't make sense," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "You told me he died in a car accident. You showed me his death certificate." Isabella laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "She forged it. Your mother is very talented with languages and documents, aren't you, Margaret? She worked for the immigration office for 5 years before Daniel was born. She knew exactly how to make fake documents look official." The truth was more complicated than that, but the essential facts were correct. I had created a false death certificate to give Daniel closure, to give him a reason why his father had disappeared that didn't involve the devastating truth, that Robert had simply decided he didn't want to be a father anymore. "Mom," Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, "is this true?" I looked at my son, this man I had raised alone, who had been the center of my world for 35 years, and saw that whatever I said next would either save our relationship or destroy it forever. "The death certificate was fake," I admitted quietly. "But Daniel, you have to understand. You lied to me." His voice was flat, emotionless. "For 27 years, you lied to me." "I was protecting you." "From what? From having a father? From knowing the truth about my own life?" Isabella was watching our exchange with obvious satisfaction, like someone enjoying a particularly entertaining show. "There's more," she said, pulling another document from her purse. "And your father didn't just abandon you randomly. He left because your mother was pregnant with another man's child." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Daniel stared at Isabella, then at me, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. "What?" he breathed. "That's not true, Madame," I said quickly. But Isabella was already handing Daniel another piece of paper, a DNA test result that I had never seen before. "I had the investigator run a test using hair from your brush and samples from both Robert Daniels and—" Isabella paused dramatically. "And from Michael Thompson, your mother's boss at the immigration office." Daniel's hands were shaking as he read the results. When he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with a pain so deep, I thought it might kill me. "Michael Thompson is my biological father?" he asked. I felt like I was drowning. "Daniel, please let me explain." "So you not only lied about Dad dying, you lied about who my father actually is?" "Robert is your father in every way that matters. He was there when you were born. He loved you." "Until he found out I wasn't his?" Daniel's voice was rising now. "Until he discovered that you had cheated on him and gotten pregnant with another man's child?" "It wasn't like that!" I was crying now, desperate to make him understand. "Michael and I, it was one time. One mistake when Robert and I were having problems. When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure who the father was. Robert chose to raise you as his own son. He loved you." Then why did he leave? I opened my mouth to answer, but Isabella beat me to it. Because Michael Thompson threatened to expose everything, she said with obvious relish. He wanted your mother to leave Robert and marry him. When she refused, he told Robert the truth about the paternity test he had secretly conducted. Daniel sank down onto a nearby bench, his head in his hands. I could see his whole world collapsing around him, and I knew that Isabella had planned this perfectly. She had waited until I was most vulnerable, until I had just exposed her cruelty, to drop this nuclear bomb that would destroy everything. So, the man I thought was my father abandoned me because I wasn't really his son, Daniel said slowly, as if trying to make sense of an impossible equation. And my real father was, what? Your boss? Someone you had an affair with? Michael died when you were 12, I said quietly. Heart attack. He never tried to contact you because I made him promise to stay away. I thought it was better if you believed Robert was your father, and that he had died. Better for who? Daniel's voice was raw with pain. Better for me, or better for you? I couldn't answer that question because the truth was that it had been better for me. Easier for me to maintain the fiction than to explain the complex, messy reality of how Daniel had been conceived. Isabella moved closer to Daniel, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, in a gesture that looked comforting, but felt predatory. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, she said softly, her voice full of fake sympathy. But I couldn't let you marry me without knowing the truth about what kind of person your mother really is. Daniel looked up at her, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of the old trust in his eyes. You were trying to protect me, he said slowly. Everything I did tonight was to show you who she really is, Isabella replied. The lying, the manipulation, the way she's controlled your entire life with her deceptions. I knew that if you heard what my family and I really thought about her, she would reveal her true nature. And when she did, I would finally have the chance to tell you the truth. I watched in horror as Isabella's plan crystallized before my eyes. She had orchestrated everything, the cruel dinner conversation, pushing me to reveal my languages, creating the perfect moment to destroy my relationship with Daniel when he would be most vulnerable and confused. You manipulated all of us, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I liberated him, Isabella shot back, from 35 years of lies and deception. Daniel stood up slowly, and when he looked at me, his eyes were empty of all the love and trust that had been there just an hour before. I need time to think, he said quietly. I need to process all of this. Of course, darling, Isabella said, taking his arm. Why don't you come stay with me tonight? We can work through this together. And that's when I realized the true scope of Isabella's plan. She hadn't just wanted to hurt me or push me out of Daniel's life. She had wanted to completely destroy the foundation of our relationship so that when the dust settled, she would be the only person Daniel felt he could trust. As I watched my son walk away with the woman who had just systematically destroyed everything we had built together over 35 years, I knew that this was far from over. Because Isabella had made one crucial mistake in her elaborate scheme. She had underestimated just how far a mother would go to save her child, even from himself. And what I was about to do next would shock everyone, including me, with its boldness and its potential for either redemption or complete destruction. The real battle for my son's soul was just beginning, and Isabella was about to discover that she had picked a fight with the wrong woman. I stood alone on that sidewalk for what felt like hours, watching Daniel disappear into the night with Isabella. The cold air bit through my dress, but I barely felt it. My entire world had just collapsed, and I wasn't sure how to begin picking up the pieces. But as I walked slowly back to my car, something Isabella had said kept nagging at me. She claimed to have hired a private investigator 3 months ago, supposedly to gather family photos for a surprise. But the documents she'd produced were far too detailed, too comprehensive, too damaging to have been collected for something as innocent as a photo display. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and really thought about what had happened tonight. Isabella's performance had been too perfect, too calculated. She had known exactly what buttons to push and when to push them. More importantly, she had those documents ready, not just ready, but perfectly organized for maximum impact. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going to fight back. My first call was to Elena Rodriguez, my neighbor who had witnessed Isabella and her friends taking pictures of my house. "Elena," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you about the day you saw Isabella here with her friends. Can you remember exactly what they were doing?" "Oh, Margaret, I was wondering when you'd call. I saw the news about the engagement being called off. Are you okay?" News traveled fast in our neighborhood. "I'm fine. But about that day, what exactly did you see?" "Well, they weren't just taking pictures of your house, honey. One of them had a whole folder of papers, and they were comparing your house to photographs, like they were checking something against a list." My suspicions deepened. "Did you see what kind of papers?" "Legal-looking documents. And that girl of Daniel's, she was on the phone most of the time, giving someone very specific instructions about taking pictures from different angles." After hanging up with Elena, I drove downtown to the public library. I had learned long ago that if you needed to dig up information about someone, the library was often the best place to start. I spent the morning researching everything I could find about Isabella Martinez and her family. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Isabella's father, Roberto Martinez, owned a chain of upscale restaurants throughout Florida, but more importantly, he had been involved in several high-profile divorce cases over the past decade, not as a party to the divorces, but as someone who provided evidence to help wealthy clients gain advantage in custody and property disputes. The pattern was always the same. Roberto would use his connections and resources to dig up damaging information about the opposing spouse. Information that would then be used to secure favorable settlements or custody arrangements. I found 3 different news articles where Roberto had been mentioned in connection with these cases, always as a family friend who had, coincidentally, discovered crucial evidence at just the right moment. My hands were shaking as I printed out the articles. Isabella hadn't hired a private investigator to surprise Daniel with family photos. She and her father had been investigating me from the moment she decided Daniel was worth marrying. Not because she loved him, but because he represented something valuable to their family. But why? Daniel was successful, but he wasn't wealthy enough to warrant this level of manipulation and research. The answer came when I dug deeper into Roberto's business dealings. His restaurant chain was struggling financially, with several locations facing foreclosure. He needed an infusion of capital, and he needed it soon. Then I found what I was looking for, a business loan application from 6 months ago, where Roberto had listed pending family investment opportunities as part of his financial planning. Daniel wasn't just Isabella's fiancé, he was her family's ticket to financial salvation. They had researched him thoroughly, identified him as a target, and Isabella had spent months joyfully cultivating their relationship, while her father gathered ammunition to use against anyone who might interfere with their plans. I was the primary threat to their scheme, so they had prepared to destroy me, if necessary. Armed with this information, I made my second important decision of the day. I was going to see Daniel and I was going to tell him everything I had discovered. But when I arrived at his apartment that evening, Isabella answered the door. "Margaret," she said with a cold smile, "how nice of you to drop by. I was just making Daniel dinner." She was wearing one of Daniel's old law school t-shirts and acting like she lived there. Behind her, I could see Daniel sitting at his kitchen table, looking exhausted and broken. "I need to speak with my son," I said firmly. "I'm not sure that's a good idea right now. Daniel is still processing everything he learned yesterday. Maybe you should give him some space." "Daniel," I called past her, "please, I have something important to tell you." He looked up at me with those empty eyes I had seen the night before. "Mom, I just can't deal with any more revelations right now." "This isn't about the past," I said desperately. "This is about Isabella, about what she and her family have been doing to you." Isabella's expression sharpened, and I saw a flash of panic cross her face before she recovered her composure. "Daniel," she said softly, turning back to him, "your mother is obviously having trouble accepting that her lies have been exposed. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I was trying to protect you from." "Isabella, your father is using you," I said quickly before she could stop me. "His restaurants are failing, and they needed someone with money to bail them out. You didn't meet Daniel by accident. You targeted him." "That's ridiculous," Isabella laughed, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Roberto Martinez has been involved in 3 different divorce cases where he provided damaging information about spouses at convenient moments. It's his business model, Isabella. He finds wealthy targets, gathers compromising information, and uses it for financial gain." Daniel was looking between us now, confusion replacing the emptiness in his eyes. "You hired a private investigator 3 months ago, not to gather family photos, but to find anything you could use to destroy my relationship with Daniel. If I became a problem," I continued. "The documents you showed us last night weren't a recent discovery. They were insurance, kept ready in case you needed them." "Daniel, don't listen to her," Isabella said, but her voice was rising with panic. "She's just trying to deflect attention from her own lies." "Then explain this," I said, pulling out the printed articles about her father. "Explain why Roberto Martinez has made a career out of digging up dirt on family members who interfere with profitable marriages." Daniel took the papers from my hands and began reading. As he did, I watched Isabella's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. "This is taken out of context," she said desperately. "My father helps people who are being unfairly treated in divorce proceedings." "By gathering information about their in-laws?" Daniel asked quietly, looking up from the articles. "By investigating their family members?" "Daniel, you have to understand. How long have you been investigating my family?" His voice was deadly calm, the same tone he used in court when he was about to destroy an opposing argument. Isabella's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. "It wasn't like that," she said weakly. "How long?" Daniel repeated. "From the beginning," she whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel set the papers down on the table and looked at Isabella with an expression I had never seen him wear: pure, cold contempt. "You researched me before we met," he said slowly. "You identified me as a target, investigated my family, gathered ammunition against my mother, and then spent months pretending to love me while planning to use everything you found if it became necessary." "I do love you!" Isabella cried, reaching for him, but he stepped back. "No, you don't. You love what I represent. You love the financial security I could provide for your family's failing business." "That's not true!" Daniel picked up his phone and started dialing. "Get out of my apartment!" "Daniel, please! Get out!" he roared, his composure finally cracking. "Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud, identity theft, and whatever other charges my lawyer friends can come up with." Isabella grabbed her purse and coat, tears streaming down her face. But these weren't the calculated tears from the restaurant. These were real, desperate tears of someone watching their carefully laid plans disintegrate. "You're making a mistake," she said from the doorway. "Your mother is still a liar. Everything I told you about her is still true." "Maybe," Daniel said quietly, but at least her lies were meant to protect me. Yours were meant to destroy me. After Isabella left, Daniel and I sat in his kitchen in uncomfortable silence. The damage from her revelations about my past was still there, hanging between us, like a wall we didn't know how to break down. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I should have seen what she was doing." "You couldn't have known," I replied. "She's very good at what she does. But I should have trusted you. I should have known that whatever mistakes you made, whatever lies you told, they came from love, not malice." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel, I should have told you the truth about your father years ago. I should have trusted you to handle it. Why didn't you?" I sighed, feeling every one of my 72 years. "Because I was ashamed. Because the truth was messy and complicated, and the lie was clean and simple. Because I thought it would hurt you less to believe your father died than to know he chose to leave." "It would have hurt," Daniel admitted, "but I deserve to know the truth." We sat together for a long time, beginning the slow process of rebuilding trust that had been shattered by lies, both Isabella's calculated deceptions and my well-intentioned ones. But our reconciliation was interrupted by a phone call that would bring news so shocking, so unexpected, that it would force us to confront not just the past we thought we knew, but a future we never could have imagined. Because Isabella's revenge was far from over, and what she was about to do next would test every lesson we had learned about truth, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The phone rang at exactly midnight, jolting both Daniel and me from the exhausted sleep we had finally fallen into on his couch. We had spent hours talking, crying, and slowly beginning to repair the damage that years of secrets and months of manipulation had caused. Daniel answered with a groggy, "Hello?" that quickly sharpened into full alertness. "What? When? Are you sure?" He was already reaching for his shoes, his face pale in the lamplight. "We'll be right there." "Daniel, what's wrong?" I asked, though the look on his face already told me it was serious. "That was the police. Isabella is in the hospital. She tried to kill herself." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. Despite everything Isabella had done, despite the lies and manipulation and cruelty, neither Daniel nor I wanted her to die. Whatever else she was still a human being who was clearly in tremendous pain. We found Roberto and Carmen in the waiting room, both looking older and more fragile than they had just 24 hours earlier. When Carmen saw us, she launched herself at Daniel, sobbing in Spanish. "This is your fault!" she cried, switching to English so we could understand her rage. "You broke her heart! You destroyed her!" "Carmen, please," Roberto said wearily, but his wife was beyond reason. "She loved you. She would have done anything for you, and you threw her away like garbage!" Daniel stood there and took her verbal assault without defending himself, though I could see the guilt eating away at him. Whatever Isabella's motivations had been, whatever her family's schemes, Daniel was a good man who had never wanted to hurt anyone. A doctor emerged from the emergency room, and we all turned toward him with desperate hope. "She's stable," he said. And I heard Roberto exhale with relief. "The overdose wasn't fatal, but it was serious. She's awake and asking for—" He consulted his chart. "Daniel Martinez?" "That's me," Daniel said, though I noticed he didn't correct the doctor's assumption about his last name. "She's quite insistent that she needs to speak with you. Normally we wouldn't allow visitors this soon, but she's become agitated every time we refuse. The psychiatrist thinks it might help if she can say whatever she needs to say." Daniel looked at me uncertainly. "Should I?" "That's your choice, sweetheart. But maybe she needs to find some peace, too." The doctor led Daniel back to the emergency room, leaving me alone with Roberto and Carmen. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Then Roberto surprised me by sitting down next to me. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Carmen looked at her husband in shock. "Roberto, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that we went too far. I'm saying that what we did was wrong." He turned to face me directly. "My daughter told me you were trying to keep Daniel away from her, that you were jealous and possessive. She said you were the obstacle to their happiness." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her." "My restaurants are failing, Mrs. Thompson. I'm 3 months behind on loan payments. And I was looking at bankruptcy. When Isabella told me about Daniel's success, about his law firm and his investments, I saw a way out." Carmen was staring at her husband as if she'd never seen him before. "You planned this? You told Isabella to target him for money?" "No," Roberto said quickly. "Isabella genuinely cared for Daniel, but when she came to me worried about your influence over him, I suggested we do some research to understand the family dynamics better. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we had hired investigators and were gathering information like Daniel was an enemy instead of a potential son-in-law. The full scope of their manipulation was even worse than I had imagined. They had taken Isabella's legitimate insecurities about my relationship with Daniel and weaponized them for financial gain. "She loves him, you know," Roberto continued. "That part was always real. But I poisoned that love by making her think she had to choose between her family's survival and her relationship with Daniel." Before I could respond, Daniel returned from the emergency room. His face was ashen and his hands were shaking. "What did she say?" I asked. Daniel sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. "She told me she's pregnant." The words hit the waiting room like a bomb. Carmen gasped, Roberto went white, and I felt my heart stop. "How is that possible?" Carmen whispered. "She's been on birth control." "Apparently not consistently," Daniel said hollowly. "She said she's been trying to get pregnant for the past 2 months. She thought if she had my baby, I would have to choose her over you, Mom." The manipulation ran even deeper than any of us had realized. Isabella hadn't just been gathering ammunition against me. She had been actively working to trap Daniel in the relationship by creating a pregnancy that would force his hand. "How far along?" Roberto asked. 8 weeks, Daniel replied. "She found out 2 days ago, right before the engagement dinner." Suddenly, Isabella's behavior at the restaurant made even more sense. She had known she was pregnant when she launched her attack on me. If her original plan to drive a wedge between Daniel and me had failed, she had a backup plan ready. "What are you going to do?" I asked gently. Daniel looked up at me with eyes full of pain and confusion. "I don't know. She's carrying my child, Mom. No matter what she's done, no matter how she's manipulated all of us, there's going to be an innocent baby who deserves a father." Carmen was crying now, but these were different tears. Tears of shame and regret, rather than anger and accusation. "This is all my fault," she said. "I raised her to think that love was something you had to fight for, something you had to win at any cost. I taught her that marriage was about security and status instead of genuine connection." Roberto put his arm around his wife. "We all made mistakes. The question now is how we fix them." A nurse approached our group. "I'm sorry, but visiting hours are over. The patient needs rest, and you're all welcome to return tomorrow after 10 a.m. As we prepared to leave, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "If you were in my situation, if you were pregnant with someone's child, someone who had lied to you and manipulated you, but who you still cared about, what would you do?" I thought about my own situation 35 years ago, when I had been pregnant with Daniel, and unsure about his paternity, caught between 2 men and trying to make the best decision for everyone involved. "I would try to find a way to do what's best for the child," I said finally. "Not what's easiest for me, not what makes the adults feel better, But what gives that baby the best chance at a happy, healthy life? Even if it meant staying with someone you couldn't trust? Trust can be rebuilt, Daniel. It takes time and effort and genuine commitment from both people, but it can be rebuilt. The question is whether Isabella is willing to do the hard work of becoming someone worthy of trust. Over the next 3 days, we all took turns visiting Isabella in the psychiatric ward where she was being held for observation. Slowly, the full story emerged. Isabella's desperation to win Daniel back had driven her to increasingly dangerous behavior. She had convinced herself that if she could just eliminate me as a threat, everything would go back to the way it was supposed to be. The pregnancy was her final attempt to force the outcome she wanted. But during our conversations, something unexpected began to happen. Stripped of her designer clothes and carefully applied makeup, separated from her family's toxic expectations and financial pressures, Isabella began to show glimpses of the person she might have been under different circumstances. She was still manipulative, still selfish, but she was also young and scared and genuinely remorseful about the pain she had caused. "I know you have no reason to forgive me," she said to me during one visit. "I know I don't deserve Daniel, and I know I don't deserve this baby, but I want to try to be better. I want to be the kind of person who deserves a second chance." "What does that look like to you?" I asked. "I don't know yet. But maybe it starts with telling the truth for once. About everything." And so Isabella began the long process of confessing her lies, not just to Daniel and me, but to herself. She admitted that her feelings for Daniel had started as genuine attraction, but had been corrupted by her family's financial needs and her own insecurities. She acknowledged that her cruelty to me had come from jealousy, not just of my relationship with Daniel, but of the kind of unconditional love I had shown him, love she had never experienced from her own parents. Most importantly, she admitted that she didn't know how to love someone without trying to control them, and that if she was going to be a mother, she needed to learn. Daniel listened to all of this with the careful attention of a lawyer evaluating evidence. But I could see something else in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of compassion. "I can't marry you," he told her finally. "Not now. Maybe not ever. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken." Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't argue or try to change his mind. "But I want to be a father to our child," Daniel continued. "A real father, not someone who just sends checks and shows up for birthdays. If you're serious about becoming a better person, then we need to figure out how to do this together, even if we're not together." It wasn't the fairy tale ending Isabella had dreamed of, but it was perhaps something more valuable. A chance for redemption, for growth, for all of us to learn how to love better. Roberto and Carmen agreed to sell their failing restaurants and move closer to us, not to interfere with Daniel and Isabella's relationship, but to be present for their grandchild while taking responsibility for their role in creating this mess. As for me, I finally told Daniel everything, not just about his biological father, but about my own mistakes, my fears, and my dreams for his future. We spent hours talking about the past, not to relieve old pain, but to understand how we had gotten here and how we could build something stronger going forward. 6 months later, Isabella gave birth to a beautiful baby girl they named Sophia. She wasn't the circumstances any of us would have chosen, but she was perfect and innocent and deserving of all the love we could give her. Isabella moved into a small apartment near Daniel, and they began the challenging work of co-parenting, while she continued therapy and he rebuilt his life. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and arguments, and moments when it felt like the old patterns of manipulation might resurface. But there were also breakthroughs. Moments when Isabella chose honesty over deception, when Daniel chose patience over anger, when all of us chose love over fear. I became Grandmother Margaret to little Sophia, and despite everything that had happened, I found joy in watching this new life unfold. Isabella and I would never be close friends, but we learned to respect each other as two women who loved the same man and wanted what was best for his daughter. The restaurant where it all began, Chez Laurent, became a place of healing rather than confrontation. Monsieur Dubois hired Isabella as a hostess when she was ready to work again, and Daniel and I would sometimes eat there, remembering not the night that tore us apart, but the night that forced us to rebuild something stronger. As I held Sophia on her first birthday, watching Daniel and Isabella work together to light her candles, I realized that sometimes the most broken families create the strongest bonds, not because the breaking doesn't matter, but because the choice to rebuild does. We had all learned hard lessons about truth, about trust, about the difference between love and possession. Isabella learned that real love doesn't require perfect control. Daniel learned that protecting someone sometimes means being willing to lose them. And I learned that some secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, cause more harm than the truth ever could. The woman who had once called me a cow and wished I would disappear was now someone I could sit beside at family gatherings, not because I had forgotten what she had done, but because we had both chosen to become better people than we had been in that restaurant. Sophia would grow up knowing all of her story, the good parts and the complicated parts. She would know that love is messy and imperfect and worth fighting for. She would know that families can be broken and healed, and that the strongest bonds are often forged in the fire of forgiveness. And on quiet evenings, when Sophia was asleep and the house was peaceful, Daniel and I would sometimes talk about that night at Chez Laurent, not with anger or regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes it takes being torn completely apart to discover what we're really made of and what we're really capable of building together. Isabella never did learn to speak Daniel's language of unconditional love perfectly, but she learned to speak her daughter's language, and in the end, that was enough. Sophia grew up bilingual not just in English and Spanish, but in the language of second chances, of forgiveness earned through consistent action, of love that chooses to stay even when staying is hard. As for me, I learned that being a mother doesn't end when your child grows up. It evolves, deepens, expands to include new people and new challenges and new opportunities to love beyond what you thought possible. The night I stood up in that restaurant and spoke 3 languages to a room full of shocked faces feels like a lifetime ago now. But the lessons from that night, about truth, about courage, about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, those lessons live on in every choice we make as a family. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.